They noticed it only after the third summit, though later many would swear the unease had been there from the beginning, buried beneath protocol and pride. The first gathering had been chaos wrapped in ceremony, fleets crowding the edges of neutral space, warships gleaming like drawn knives beneath distant stars. Every species arrived armored in both metal and mistrust, escorts flanking their diplomats like shadows that could kill. It was expected. It was tradition. Power, after all, was the only language the galaxy truly respected. The second summit had been quieter. Not peaceful, never that, but restrained. Fleets still lingered in orbit. Weapons still hummed beneath polished hulls, but something intangible had shifted. A hesitation, a delay in aggression, a warlord choosing silence where once there would have been fire. No one could explain it, and no one dared question it. Not yet. It was only during the third summit that the pattern became impossible to ignore. Delegates gathered once more beneath the vast crystalline dome of Concord Prime, where starlight filtered through transparent walls and painted every species in cold, equal light. The air carried the sterile scent of recycled oxygen, tinged faintly with the metallic bite of tension. Eyes, compound, mechanical, luminous, and human, watched each other with practiced suspicion. Outside, the void stretched endlessly, crowded with the silent presence of waiting armadas, except one. Earth. No ships darkened the stars behind them. No escort fleets drifted in formation. No hidden weapon signatures whispered through the station's sensors. Humanity arrived as they always did. One vessel, modest and unarmed by every measurable standard, gliding into dock like it had nothing to fear. At first, it had been dismissed as arrogance or stupidity, a young species playing at diplomacy, unaware of the rules that govern survival among the stars. Some even found it amusing. Others saw opportunity. But by the third summit, amusement had curdled into something colder, because something else had changed. Wars that should have ignited didn't. Triggers went unpulled. Commands went unspoken. Entire fleets poised for destruction hesitated, just long enough for words to replace weapons. For treaties, fragile and unprecedented, to take root where annihilation had once been inevitable. And always, Earth stood at the center of it, unarmed, unprotected, unafraid. Whispers began to spread through the corridors of Concord Prime, slipping between delegates like static in the air. Questions no one wanted to voice aloud. Sensors were checked, recalibrated, checked again. Nothing, no hidden armadas, no cloaked technologies, no signs of deception, and yet, veteran commanders, beings who had burned worlds without hesitation, felt something they could not name pressing at the edges of their instincts. Not fear exactly, something deeper, older, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air grows heavy and every living thing knows to be still. Humanity never raised their voice, never made threats, never needed to. They simply arrived alone, and somehow that was enough to make the entire galaxy choose peace. Concord Prime was not built. It was negotiated into existence, layered upon ancient treaties, forgotten wars, and the bones of extinct empires that once believed peace could be enforced rather than earned. Floating at the gravitational midpoint of a dead star cluster, the station hung in space like a suspended judgment, its structure spanning thousands of kilometers, its surface a lattice of impossible geometry and refracted light. From a distance, it looked like a crown forged from glass and orbiting storms. Up close, it felt less like architecture, and more like a warning. Inside, the air was controlled perfection, temperature balanced to satisfy 1,000 biological requirements, oxygen purified through silent mechanical lungs hidden behind glowing walls. Every corridor shimmered with faint holographic script, treaties, translations, diplomatic protocols scrolling endlessly like prayers no one truly believed in anymore. Beneath it all, hidden in the station's bones, were systems no one openly acknowledged. Fail-safes, deterrents, last resort annihilation codes sealed behind layers of interspecies authorization. Concord Prime was peace only on the surface. Below it, it was a loaded weapon pointed inward. And into this fragile illusion stepped Ambassador Alara Venn of Earth. She did not arrive with ceremony. There was no grand procession, no escort of armored diplomats, no hovering security drones marking her importance. The docking bay opened with a soft mechanical sigh, and she simply walked through. human, unenhanced, unshielded, her footsteps echoing faintly against the crystalline floor. Her attire was minimal by galactic standards, a dark formal uniform stitched with subtle threads that absorbed and reflected light in slow pulses, like breathing shadows. No insignias of conquest, no visible weapons, nothing to suggest dominance or submission. The chamber reacted to her presence in ways that were almost imperceptible, yet deeply unsettling. Environmental sensors recalibrated without command. Security grids ran redundant scans that returned nothing unusual, and therefore felt more alarming than if they had. Even the ambient noise of the station, usually a steady hum of mechanical life, seemed to thin for a moment as though listening. Alara carried only a slim data slate in her hand, not glowing aggressively, not projecting intimidation, just present, like a thought she had not yet spoken aloud. Waiting in the central chamber were the delegates, representatives of species that had rewritten continents into ash and turned nebulae into graveyards. The Threx Dominion stood nearest the diplomatic corps, their exoskeletal frames towering and motionless, chitin plates etched with the marks of countless victories. Their presence alone was enough to trigger ancient survival instincts in lesser species. Behind them, the Veil Consortium hovered within adaptive grav fields, their translucent forms shifting like living equations. The humans were always the smallest group in the room, always the quietest, and yet somehow the focus always drifted back to them. Ilara stopped at the center of Concord Prime's grand chamber, beneath the suspended holographic sphere that displayed the political map of the galaxy, constantly rewriting itself in response to war, trade, and collapse. She did not look up at it. She already knew what it showed. Everyone did. Instead, she looked at them, not as threats, not as gods of destruction, but as participants in something she still believed, against all logic, could be reasoned with. Outside the transparent dome above, entire fleets drifted in orbit. The Threx armada burned faintly in the distance like a scar across space. Other fleets mirrored them, forming a silent ring of mutual deterrence. Weapons systems tracked each other in patient, predatory equilibrium. One mistake would end civilizations. And yet Earth stood here, alone, no ships, no visible defense grid, no escort armada waiting beyond the horizon of stars. Just one woman. And the uneasy truth spreading through Concord Prime like a virus no one could contain. Somehow, that was enough. Whispers began before anyone realized they were speaking out loud. At first it was subtle, almost dignified. The kind of quiet suspicion that exists in every diplomatic chamber, where history has already proven that peace is just war, waiting for paperwork. But Concord Prime did not allow secrets to stay small for long. Its walls carried sound too efficiently, its translation systems too perfectly, its atmosphere too carefully tuned. Even hesitation became audible here. Humanity is unarmed, someone said, almost offended by the idea. Or disguised, another replied, voice low and sharpened like a blade hidden in silk. The word Earth itself began to carry weight it had never held before. Not contempt, not dismissal. Something closer to uncertainty. And that was far more dangerous in a room full of conquerors. Outside the chamber's panoramic shield, space remained still, but not peaceful. It was crowded, layered, alive with the silent geometry of war. Fleet formations from the Threx Dominion held position like predators refusing to blink. The Veil Consortium maintained gravitational distortion fields that bent starlight into impossible angles. Smaller civilizations hovered at the edges, caught between fear and ambition, knowing that one miscalculation would erase them from the galactic map entirely. And yet, all of them watched Earth's empty corridor, no escorts. No dreadnought shadowing their approach. No signature of hidden orbital defense. Just a single diplomatic vessel that had docked with the calm inevitability of a tide arriving on a shore that had forgotten it could drown. Inside Concord Prime, the tension began to change shape. It was no longer just political. It became physiological. Threx warlords, beings who had once dismantled planetary resistance with surgical efficiency, found their mandibles clicking in irregular rhythm. Veil negotiators experienced microfractures in their collective thought streams, subtle disruptions that their species associated with cognitive instability. Even the human delegates from other colonies, hardened by centuries of interstellar bureaucracy, found themselves checking systems that reported nothing wrong, and somehow felt less reassured by that absence. Because absence, they realized, was becoming Earth's signature. No fleet, no threat, no need. And still, wars were not starting. That was the detail no one could ignore anymore. A skirmish fleet near the outer corridor disengaged without explanation. A Threx attack protocol initiated in a private war council hours before Earth's arrival was quietly revoked. Communications channels recorded hesitation loops, commands issued, then retracted within milliseconds, as though the universe itself was refusing to accept them. Inside the chamber, ambassadors began to feel it in their bones. Not fear exactly. Fear had structure. Fear had cause. This was different. This was the sensation of standing too close to something that had already decided you were irrelevant. Ilara Venn remained still at the center of it all, her expression unreadable. But something in the room kept pulling attention back to her, like gravity without source. She did not react to the whispers, did not acknowledge the shifting tension. She simply waited, as though the galaxy's uncertainty was not a problem to be solved, but a condition already understood. A Threx envoy finally broke the silence, voice deep enough to vibrate through the chamber floor. "Your species arrives without force," it said. "Yet everywhere you go, conflict. Stops, no accusation, just observation." And beneath it, a crack forming in certainty. Ilara did not answer immediately. Her gaze drifted briefly toward the vast, shielded ceiling where fleets hung like restrained storms. When she finally spoke, her voice carried no threat. No persuasion, only truth, delivered too calmly to be comfortable. "We don't bring an army to peace summits," she said softly, "because if we did, you wouldn't recognize what peace was supposed to look like afterward." And for the first time in recorded galactic diplomatic history, no one replied. The truth was not spoken. It surfaced, not as a message, not as a transmission, but as a disturbance in the underlying systems of Conquered Prime, like something vast brushing against the edge of reality and forgetting for just a moment to hide its presence. It began with the station's outer sensor lattice. Thousands of independent observation nodes, spread across millions of kilometers of monitored space, simultaneously registered a condition they had no classification for. At first, engineers assumed malfunction, then interference, then coincidence. But coincidence does not synchronize across civilizations. Deep within the diplomatic core, holographic displays flickered. The galactic map, normally a shifting tapestry of alliances and conflicts, paused mid-update. Entire regions of space hesitated, as if the system itself had lost confidence in what came next. And in that frozen moment, something older than diplomacy pressed against the edges of perception. It was not a fleet. It was not a weapon. It was awareness, a presence without coordinates, a silence so complete it began to erase the sound of thought. Somewhere in the lower maintenance levels, a Veil technician stopped breathing for 3 full seconds before realizing their species had no biological reason to feel dread, and yet they were trembling anyway. Across the chamber, Threx biometric systems spiked with aggressive readiness signals, then abruptly dropped into confusion loops as their threat matrices failed to assign a target. Because there was nothing to target, and yet everything felt watched. That was the realization that fractured the room. Humanity had not been studied like the others. It had not been measured in conquest cycles or war simulations. No, humanity had been observed in absence, in the gaps between catastrophes, in the moments after fleets hesitated, in the seconds where destruction should have begun but did not. And in those gaps, something had been listening. Long before Conquered Prime ever existed, long before the first Galactic Council ever convened, Earth had sent signals into the dark between galaxies. Not intentional ones, not controlled ones. Accidental emissions from early deep space experiments, raw, chaotic bursts of electromagnetic curiosity flung into an ocean that should have been empty. But it wasn't empty. Something answered. Not in language, not in contact, but in attention. And attention at that scale was indistinguishable from awakening. The realization did not arrive as a speech. It arrived as fragmentation, broken data pulses leaking into every system aboard Conquered Prime. Star charts briefly revealed regions of space that should not exist. Temporal logs flickered forward and backward by impossible increments. Security systems began flagging non-causal influence events with increasing urgency, then stopped reporting altogether, as if refusing to document what they could not survive understanding. And then came the memory buried inside Earth's diplomatic archive, classified not by governments but by consensus across every human colony. A recovered fragment from the first Deep Black expedition, a recording that had no origin point, only content, a vast absence between galaxies, a region where light did not bend, did not scatter, did not behave as physics demanded, and in that absence something had noticed them noticing it. The expedition had returned with only one surviving transmission before silence swallowed the rest. It is not out there. It is between observation and reality, and it knows we are thinking about it. After that, humanity changed its behavior in ways no other species understood. They stopped expanding recklessly. They stopped calling deep space empty, and most importantly, they stopped bringing their military to places where intent mattered more than force. Back in Conquered Prime, the chamber lights dimmed without command. Not darkness, something more deliberate. As if illumination itself had become optional in the presence of what was now undeniably here. No one saw it. No one could. But every being in the station understood the same impossible truth at once. Earth was not alone at these summits. It had never been alone. The Threx warlord's laughter cracked through the grand chamber like a weapon being drawn. Loud, confident, almost relieved. It was the sound of a predator convinced it had finally found something it could understand again. Bluff, politics, fear disguised as philosophy. The vibration of it rolled across the crystalline floor, rattling suspended holoprojectors and making lesser delegates instinctively shift back. Enough, it growled, mandibles clicking in rhythmic disdain. You speak in riddles and ghosts. If Earth carries power beyond fleets and armadas, then show it. Or admit what we already suspect, your species survives by deception. Around it, the chamber tightened. Every faction leaned in, sensors sharpening, translation matrices accelerating. This was the moment that always came before war in Conquered Prime. The instant where words either became treaties or detonations. Outside the transparent dome, distant fleets subtly adjusted formation. Weapons that had been idle for hours began to wake, their targeting arrays slowly aligning as if responding to a thought rather than a command. Elara Venn did not move. She looked smaller than anyone in the chamber, standing alone beneath the vast suspended map of the galaxy. No armor, no visible defense. Just stillness. So complete it felt unnatural in a place built for negotiation between civilizations that measured existence in megatons. But something about her stillness made the room uneasy. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. Like standing too close to a cliff edge and realizing the ground had already stopped being certain. The Threx warlord stepped forward, each step heavy enough to make the station subtly compensate its gravity dampeners. If you have nothing, it pressed, voice lowering into something almost intimate, almost predatory, then you are wasting the galaxy's time. A ripple of agreement moved through its escorts. Across the chamber, other delegates prepared their contingencies. Emergency protocols began quietly initializing in background systems. Conquered Prime, for all its elegance, was still a machine designed to survive diplomacy failing. Elara finally exhaled, not in surrender, in patience. We asked it once, she said softly. The chamber stilled. Even the translation systems hesitated, as if unsure whether to render her words as threat or confession. The Threx warlord tilted its head. Asked what? Elara's gaze lifted, not to the delegates, not to the weapons, but to the unseen space beyond the dome, where fleets waited in controlled hostility and stars burned indifferent to all of them. We asked what it was, she continued, when we first realized something was responding to us between the dark. A silence followed that was different from all others. This one had weight. You think you are watching us now? She said, voice steady, each word measured like it had been paid for in something irreversible. You think your fleets are the only thing holding this moment together. Her eyes returned to the warlord. But they are not. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the Threx command structure. Not emotional, computational. Their systems began re-evaluating threat hierarchies, recalculating unknown variables that refused to stabilize. Around them, other species felt it too, the subtle distortion in certainty like gravity shifting without warning. Alara raised the slate in her hand. It was still inert, still ordinary, but the chamber lights dimmed slightly as it lifted, as if responding to something beneath perception. "We don't bring our army," she said, quieter now, and that quietness carried further than any shout, "because it does not arrive when summoned." A pause. Outside, every fleet simultaneously froze. Not at command, at absence of permission. Alara's expression did not change. "It arrives," she finished, "when we are about to stop asking for peace." For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then every external sensor on Concord Prime went blind. The silence after the blindness was not empty. It was occupied. For exactly one heartbeat of the station, if time could still be trusted to behave normally, every external sensor aboard Concord Prime went dark. Not damaged, not destroyed, simply unavailable, as if reality itself had politely turned its face away. Inside the grand chamber, light returned first. Slowly, reluctantly, like the universe reconsidering whether it wanted to continue the conversation. Delegates blinked, recalibrated, forced their systems back online. Emergency protocols screamed for confirmation that never came. Outside the dome, fleets reappeared on long-range feeds, still present, still aligned, but something about their positioning felt different. Not moved, not attacked, rewritten in a way no tactical algorithm could comfortably accept. And then the truth settled in. Nothing had fired. Nothing had exploded. Nothing had invaded. And yet every weapon in orbit had gone silent at the exact same moment. The Threx warlord's posture had changed. Subtly but irrevocably. The arrogance was gone, not replaced by fear but by something far more dangerous, recalculation. Its mandibles clicked once, then stopped entirely, as if even instinct had been advised to remain quiet. Across the chamber, systems that had spent centuries defining threat levels simply stopped updating. Alara Venn lowered her slate, not because the situation was over, but because it no longer required explanation. Outside the transparent dome, space itself seemed unchanged, but perception no longer trusted that observation. Fleets still existed, armadas still held formation. Yet every targeting solution, every firing solution, every contingency cascade had collapsed into the same unresolved conclusion. No valid engagement condition found. And beneath that technical failure, something deeper. A shared understanding across every command system, every war mind, every intelligence watching the summit from orbit. They were no longer the highest authority in the sky above Concord Prime. No species had issued a command. No transmission had been received. And yet every act of potential violence had been declined, not by diplomacy, not by deterrence, but by something that existed outside the architecture of choice itself. Inside the chamber, one of the lesser delegates finally spoke, voice fractured, struggling to remain composed. "What did you do?" Alara didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were not on them anymore. They were on the space beyond the dome, where fleets hung like suspended verdicts that had suddenly lost meaning. "We didn't do anything," she said quietly. "That's the point." A pause stretched long enough for entire histories to feel heavy. Then she added, softer, almost like an admission she had carried too long alone. "We stopped being the loudest thing in the dark." A distant flicker passed across the outer hull of Concord Prime. Not damage, not attack, more like a presence adjusting its attention. Every species aboard the station felt it in their own way. Some as pressure behind the eyes, others as a sudden absence of certainty, others still as the terrifying clarity that they had never truly been alone in their own decisions. The Threx warlord finally spoke again, but its voice had changed. Not weaker, smaller. "Then what?" it asked slowly, as if each word now had consequences beyond language. "Is your army?" Alara Venn looked at them at last, and for the first time, there was something like sorrow in her expression. Not for herself, not for Earth, but for the simplicity the galaxy had lost the moment it began to understand the answer. "We don't bring it," she said. A beat, a breath, a galaxy holding still, because it was never ours to command. And far beyond Concord Prime, beyond fleets, beyond treaties, beyond empires learning too late what silence meant, Something vast continued watching, not waiting to attack, not waiting to negotiate, just ensuring with absolute calm inevitability that peace remained the only outcome the universe would allow.